I had this idea to walk backwards every day for 40 days in a row here in July, August, and a little bit of September 2024. I used to walk backwards almost every single day since the pandemic for several years. And what's going to happen is every single day I'm going to record my thoughts and feelings that's going on for me in real time about the creative process or whatever else comes up for these 40 days. And you're going to hear, maybe 5 to 7 minutes per day of the best of recorded during that live walking backwards for about a quarter to a half of a mile per day. And it's in real time. So I'm really walking backwards as I'm talking with you outside. So enjoy the whole episode, and here we go. Today is the 13th day, which is a 4, and it's August 8th, 2024, August 8th. So we take in the world through sensations, and those sensations are the 5 physical senses and all the other senses. And then we have turns of phrases like you can smell it coming, or I hear you, or I feel you, I see you. And then we have the other sensibilities that feels balance to me. Balance is a sense, comes from your inner ear, vestibular systems, intuition is a feeling. And within all of those is a certain rhythm, a certain timing, a certain pulse. There's the pulse of, literally my pulse, which is part of my heartbeat and the rhythm of the blood flow, or the certain rhythm of a bird singing or water cascading, and it changes and alters. And within that, there is all these rhythms and timings. And through these rhythms and timings, we sense the world. The sensations that I have walking backwards in the morning in Los Angeles around 6 in the morning is very unique to this timing of the day. If I were to do it at a different timing, then I would have a lot of different sensations. And all of these rhythms, timings, sensations impact how I experience things, but also my thoughts and feelings and how I express myself. So how I express myself, which is one of the many reasons why I'm doing this at 6 in the morning, is unique to this rhythm timing of the day, just like you. And sometimes we get into a situation where we get stuck and there is no variation, or very little variation that we sense, because we get stuck. And in that stuckness creates a disharmony, because in a harmonizing world, there's change, there's rhythm, there's timing, there's the season. So part of the natural world is to go from summer to fall, from fall to winter, from winter to spring, and so on, to have that kind of rhythm. And when we don't have it, we get stuck. If we were to get stuck into summer, that wouldn't be so good. We may say we want it. We get stuck on anything, and it goes beyond a natural, organic rhythm of life, then we're out of balance. And one way you can tell if it's nature or natural or what have you is that there's going to be endless variations. If you have a rhythm or a timing that has no variations, then something is most likely either off or it's mechanically based. For instance, if you have a dishwasher, your dishwasher has a fixed 35-minute cycle. It's a fixed cycle. It goes through cycles, just like summer, fall, winter, spring. In the natural world, you have cycles. You have these 4 seasons, and yes, you have the days that are the shortest, and yes, you have the days that are the longest, and yes, you have the equinoxes, and there's endless variation. The peak, longest day of the year is always slightly different. It's within a 24 to 48 hour window, but it's never exactly the same. Even the sunrise and the sunset changes, it alters. So in our creative world, that's what we want to relate with. We want to relate with the timing and the phase, the rhythm, as opposed to the man-made world, which is going to be you show up every day at 9 o'clock on the dot. You work for so many hours, and then you have a lunch break at 1 p.m. on the dot. and you have 60 minutes. So you have a mechanistic life. And so we will get to a thing where it just doesn't feel good because we've only been dealing with that kind of structured factory life for 175 years. It's similar to eating fast food, highly processed foods. That's, while it's popular and it's mainstream and everybody's doing it, it's actually one of the most unique and experimental time periods for human beings in the first world countries to do, actually. If you think about it, everyone who's eating processed food or is actually part of a very large experiment, even though it's popular, but it's still a very large experiment as to, gee, I wonder what would happen if I ate this kind of product instead of food. Like, wow, they're part of a trailblazing opportunity, even though the perception is, oh, I'm doing what everybody else is doing, and there's a few outliers that are eating a nature-based foods. And what does this have to do with the creative process, Joshua? Well, it's a nature-based approach to the creative process, and what we're working with here are fundamental, always want to bring the fun back into fundamental approaches to create an environment where your innate, natural, organic, rhythmic talents, skills, creativity can have the maximum amount of expansion and growth, development for you to lead the most fulfilling and expressive creative life. I know many people that have been on TV shows, feature films, and the people that burn out in their creativity are people that are involved in projects for a sustained period of time where it's very much akin to a factory, very much akin to a production line where they work on a particular kind of a task and they only do that particular task as part of a larger process of creating something, like a TV show. It usually shows up in TV shows, actually, because TV shows have a high amount of product or results to get out into the marketplace in a very structured way. So all of that to say that when you work in a certain kind of production rhythm, a certain kind of timing that is not nature-based when it comes to your creative work, the probability of burnout is quite high because it's not based on nature. It's based on the production schedule, the assembly line. And in our culture, again, it goes back to the production of food as an example. When you have a production of food and it's not nature-based, like say a farm, what happens is that you grow potatoes, and all you do is grow potatoes because you have a contract for potatoes. And within a couple of years, your soil is depleted. Maybe not even years, maybe just a couple of rotations of crops. Your soil is depleted, and then you have to either artificially jack it up with different kinds of chemicals and fertilizers, or you have to let it go fallow, or you plant something else. But if you explore the world of biodynamic farming or any other kind of farming of that ilk, then you don't have rows and rows of a monocrop, which is the same thing as someone saying working on a TV show and only working in music. And you get that naturally occurring cross-pollination, mutual support, etc. And you get tired, you take a break, and that's healthy. That's part of nature. And then you come back. It's very different than burnout. Like, for instance, with a lady being pregnant. With pregnancy, you have pregnancy and you have those 40 weeks, and the weeks are different, and sometimes you have more energy, sometimes you have less energy, and then the day you give birth, it can be 3 or 4 hours, it can be 30 or 40 hours, and you can be exhausted afterwards. But it's part of a natural process. You're not in labor for 9 months. That wouldn't be natural, that wouldn't be sustainable. So it's the same thing for your creativity, for your creative process. And this process is about discovering what that is, and then rediscovering what that is, and then allowing for changes and growth. And perhaps you have different needs at certain phases of your creative project or different phases of your life. But if you don't build that baseline of intuition, of sense and sensibility, you won't get there because you'll be constantly overriding for the sake of the assembly line. It's all about rhythm and timing. Day 14, August 9th, 2024. What I do know is that it's a beautiful foggy morning. It's beautiful. I don't see my beautiful San Gabriel Mountains. Can't even see the Hollywood Hills. As I was walking to my walk, I heard a guy say, "So, is that for Doug?" And he was talking about one of those Escalade rides that take you to the airport. And coupled with that was that horrible smell of like bad perfume, disinfectant, trying to cover up cigarette smoke. Because it was one of those cars that they call livery cars that basically just take people to the airport, or car for hire. And in that moment, the word Doug got wrapped around all those other sensory feelings that arose in me from that smell, impacting, for that moment at least, Doug. And it colored how I felt about the word Doug in that moment. Maybe how he said it, maybe, but definitely how I heard it. Everything is neutral. Every person, place, and thing is actually neutral. Every line of dialogue is neutral. Everything is neutral until we, either the creator of it, the writer, the actor, the storyteller, infuse it with meaning, with a thought and a feeling behind it. But until then, it's neutral. It's just like saying the number 150 is bad, but the number 173 is good. That's insane. No one would say that. And in math, they even have positive and negative numbers. But those are the same numbers. They're just, some are positive and some are negative, based on the marking we give it. But how we feel about it is based on the context of what we're talking about. And I feel people live with that and accept that, but not so much with words. It gets a little cloudy. It gets a little cloudy when it's an emotional word like love and hate and, expletives. People assume a meaning to highly emotionally charged words. Yeah, for sure. And I get that. And they're still neutral. So just start noticing how when you listen to something or you speak something, how that word, that phrase, that sentence, that person, that place, that thing gets colored by a lot of different influences that go on simultaneously, inclusive of the intentionality that's being shared and exclusive of the intentionality being shared. Like when that person said Doug, they were most likely talking about a hotel guest or someone they had known on the phone, someone they didn't know personally for sure. And then the layer on top of that was, for me, that horrible smell. And that was unique to me. So being able to parse that out is really important for an artist, for a creative. And just noticing it starts to give different degrees of freedom. Because when I hear something that's part of my story, or part of my old or outdated or habitual pattern, then I can also have a little more space around it. And space is an optimal experience if I want to change or grow or shift. It gives me room to navigate. Love this gray day. Absolutely love it. Gray skies. It's a little bit cooler. It's been really hot. So if I said 100, the number 100 doesn't have any inherent meaning. When I just said 100, I had a certain thought and a certain feeling. I did not include the other words around that thought and feeling, but if you felt what I was feeling, I was talking about how uncomfortable and how much I didn't like being so hot. 100. It's 100 degrees outside. And then I could take that same number and shift it to something else. 100. So that has a different feeling, right? And what I was working with was shock and surprise and maybe a little dismay about a certain food that I love so much, going from like $20 or $30 to $100 brings home the thing of that the number 100 has no meaning by itself. It's just a number, and words are the same. I feel that it's easier to see it most likely with people, places, and things, and then those connecting words not as easy. Those other connecting words ground it and will connect it and keep it established. It's still colored, just like all the words around Doug. Is that for Doug? Sure, it comes through on Doug, right? How I think and feel about Doug, and the word that, because that is referencing the object, but all the other words that surround it get impacted. I had no idea we were going to have this conversation today. I would have worn something a little nicer, just so you know. I knew we were going to have this kind of detailed conversation. Well, today's a little gray, so I'm going to be quiet for the rest of the walk, and have a beautiful day yourself. Oh, the stories we tell ourselves. And then we as creative artists, we create stories, right? But we tell ourselves stories just as much. And one of those games that we're playing, known or unknown to us, is that we need to break open our stories that we don't know are stories, and see them as stories. There's this street that is lined with palm trees, and the palm trees are literally every 20 feet thereabouts, and they're symmetrical, meaning there's one on one side, one on the other. And if I didn't know that they were planted by a super uber wealthy oil magnate back in the early 1900s as his driveway to his mansion, if I didn't know that story, then I could have a space in myself for a story that said that, wow, look at this anomaly on the planet, that these palm trees are just growing up spontaneously on both sides of the street for like a mile. That's crazy. Look at this most peculiar occurrence. Or I could just look at the beautiful base of the palm tree and go, oh my goodness, this looks just like the foot of an elephant. This is probably some kind of remnant of a time when elephants ruled the world and made this street and honored themselves by putting these many elephant-looking trees, at least the base looks like an elephant foot, all along this road. Wow, that's crazy. But instead, we go for the story about an oil magnet. As I was rounding the corner to come to the area where I do this walking backwards with you every morning here, I passed a guy in front of this hotel smoking a cigarette. Just smoking a cigarette. Most likely European by his clothing and his stance. We just nodded and moved on. So the story I tell myself is, oh, the poor guy, he hasn't gotten that email about how bad smoking is for you. But if I were to timeline jump to 1955, 1960, I would go, ooh, cool guy. He's probably from Europe and he's so cool. If it was somewhere between World War I and World War II, I might go, hey buddy, can I bum one off of you? But instead, I only look at it from my perspective of today, 2024. But it's all around the stories that we tell ourselves. And it is so important to break open the stories that we tell ourselves in order to tell the most authentic stories, the most real stories, the most resonant stories. If you're a parent, you would hopefully hold your children in an environment where they could tell you stories that may or may not be in alignment with your current information, and be able to encourage that kind of story creation for your child as a parent. And if you didn't, it would look something like your child would tell you something and you'd go, no, that's not right. It's not that elephants went up and down the street. It's because, you see, there was this oil tycoon and he wanted to make a grand driveway, and it doesn't disallow what part of you holds as your perspective or your truth, but it does create a space for something else to exist. And if I can do that for my life, most of the time, I've created an environment where I can do the same for my characters. And not only do the same for my characters, but to go deep inside of their perspective, fleshing out their hopes and their dreams, their fears and their secrets, their sophisticated or less than sophisticated ways of defending, manipulating, grasping, fighting for their truth, their perspective. Just like the guy with the cigarette. If we jump timelines, how I look at that person smoking a cigarette changes dramatically over 100 years. And if I don't get fixated or stuck in any one story, and I can see multiple layers, not that I have to start smoking a cigarette for this to work, if I can at least see different perspectives on all the stories that try to become concrete in my head, the more ability I'll have to shapeshift, alter, grow, develop, encourage not only the stories I truly want to tell in an authentic and deep way, I get to do that for others as well. I get to do that for the art or the film or the story that I engage with in my day-to-day life as well. It's a huge perspective shift, and it has huge ripple effects. And all this comes from our getting together every morning. And I really appreciate you being here, by the way, to walk backwards with me, to allow our collective future to be revealed as it is revealed through our peripheral. And it's such a beautiful feeling to be able to sense the future in this way. One of my core tenets, and growing up, and also my very first screensaver on my very first computer, it said, I wrote in, because back then it was just word on a screen. And so I typed in anything I wanted to, right? And I typed in, nothing is as it seems. And if I work with nothing is as it seems, then that helps me to have an inner space and an outer space of more openness, playfulness, aliveness. You gotta have a strong foundation if you're gonna have no foundation, if you're gonna play those edges. Bird on a Wire, Leonard Cohen. That's how I know that song. I don't know if it was a song or a poem first, but Bird on a Wire. He took something so ordinary and made it extraordinary because he noticed something. He noticed that he noticed something and then articulated it in a way that was unique to him, that resonates with all of us decades and decades later. Bird on a Wire. Looking forward to tomorrow without expectation. Good morning. So today is Sunday, August 11th, 2024, day number 16. Today, as I was walking to this part of the walk, I saw this guy who was just standing on the sidewalk, and he wasn't moving at all. He was just standing, and there was no story that would compel him to be standing there. Like if someone was standing there who had a dog on a leash, and you'd be like, oh, okay, he has a dog on a leash. He's standing there for that. And I could make up the story that he was waiting to pick someone up, a ride. None of those were happening. It was just a man standing. No matter how close I came to where he was, there was no change, there was no movement, there was just absolute stillness. That's the part that I noticed today. He didn't change. In that non-changing status, there's a rigidity sets in, and in that rigidity, non-movement, and when non-movement comes a stuckness, and within a stuckness comes a certain stuck pattern or unconscious pattern or a loop. I like to call them loops, because a loop is, like in music, is a repeating pattern, and if you combine that with other loops, you can actually make some pretty amazing music. So there's nothing inherently wrong with loops. The other part of loops is how much time those loops take up and for how long. Another way of saying that is frequency and duration. Sometimes we have loops, characters, people have loops that are so short duration and the frequency is so spread out over weeks or months that we don't recognize it as a loop. And then what happens is over time, those frequency and durations get shorter and the duration gets longer and longer. And again, that's where we can get into a stuck pattern. As I was doing my transition to walking backwards, I either go clockwise or counterclockwise. And I was like, wow, today's day 16. And today, for the first time, it felt like, oh, this is my pattern. I've created a pattern that I will do for 40 days. It was just interesting because here we are, like on, day 1, day 3, day 5, whatever it is, breaking a pattern by walking backwards. And these patterns can take over our lives. These patterns can bring us much success. These patterns can bring us much pain, disappointment, joy, success. So then again, it goes back to, it's not the pattern, it's my relationship to the pattern, it's my addiction to the pattern, it's my state of being as I'm in the pattern, coming in the pattern, going out of the pattern, in the pattern itself. Patterns when you make clothes. When you make clothes, you have to have a pattern first because you're going to replicate it. Patterns, there's migration patterns, repetition of frequency and duration. One of the things that makes children or people that haven't set out their patterns too tightly is that we see that freedom, we see that excitement, we see that passion, we see that novelty, we see that exploration. As artists, we definitely need that. We definitely need to have that in our work, in our exploration. And then in order for it to become something I can work with, I need to go through a phase where it becomes conscious. I need to go through a phase where it's on purpose. I need to go through a phase where I'm making choices. And then ultimately there's this area of our sense and sensibilities. And the sense and sensibilities of an artist, I feel, is very underrated, underspoken about, under-articulated, underappreciated, and yet it's everything. Your sense and sensibilities are something that are accrued throughout your entire life, so there is no end point to Sense and Sensibilities. And certain elements will be baseline and certain elements will be, well, like in visual artists, they talk about people going through different periods in their expression. You know, the blue period, the white period, the Asian period, etc. Artists, visual artists, painters can sometimes go through different periods, musicians as well, actors as well. Just a lot of times actors are hired guns, so it's not as overt. Encouragement of the development of your artistic sense and sensibilities, which includes your appreciation for the food you choose, create, go out for, enjoy. It includes how you keep your living environment, your clothes, your visual design, and your creative projects, your sense of taste, but literally and figuratively, your sense of sound from music, your sense of visual balance, your sense of color, your sense of dynamic, your sense of theme, your sense of duration, like how long a certain thing will go for, and then when does it need to shift, all those things, and so much more. It's such a intrinsic, intuitive, emotional, non-linear, feeling-based sense. So many layers. And it all happens like in a blink of an eye. It just doesn't feel right. So it comes to that element of being sensitive in the moment, to the moment, allowing for change, disallowing change when the sense and sensibility doesn't feel integrated, and having choice, having awareness of patterns, having awareness of how I feel. So let me ask you a couple questions before we wrap up today. How do you feel about your artistic creative self? If you were to give your artistic creative self an emotional age, how old would that be? If you were to give yourself an intellectual age for your artistic creative self, how old would you be? And the last question, if you were to identify masculine and feminine traits, I'm not saying gender, I'm saying traits, the classic traits of the masculine, the classic traits of the feminine, which one would you say would be more apparent, dominant in your artistic creative expression, as well as your artistic creative process? So we're parsing out the process of you creating and when you're in your expression of the creative element. That would be a very interesting question to check in with yourselves, because then you could see what kind of nurturing and support you can give yourself based on your emotional age and your intellectual age. You could even do physical. If you wanted to throw in physical, you can throw in it as many as you want, and you start to create a profile, an image of your artistic creative self. You know, when children are children, they need their mommy more than their daddy for the first X number of years, and then based on a bunch of other stuff, they start to need their daddy more in different ways. Or said another way, they need the feminine energy for so many years more, and at a certain point they start to lean on the masculine energy more. So my question to you is, when you start to look at your artistic creative self in this way, where are you? Are you leaning on the feminine more? Leaning on the masculine more? Or do you feel like you're fully launched and that's not even a consideration? Just walked by a neighbor that I hadn't seen in a long time, and she was walking with this other lady with a big bag of gear and another bag that looked like an overnight bag, and she was like, "Oh, hi, I haven't seen you in so long." I was like, "Hi." She goes, "Today I'm having my photo taken." I'm like, "Oh, wow, good for you." She goes, "Yeah, I gotta get it in now in the morning light." Morning light is an easier light to work with when doing photography. And I guess she had hired or a friend or whatever, but you know, pretty early in the morning, 6:30. And she said it in such a light and sparkly way, and it reflected or refreshed my feeling of our conversation of, you know, the younger creative self of, I'm having my picture taken today, came forward. And I was like, how old is she emotionally, right? In that moment emotionally, she was probably a little girl going to school, right? In her little princess outfit. So probably 5 or 6, and she had a wand and she had a crown on, and she was having her picture taken. And there's also a change. There's a newness coming in, because it's something that she doesn't do every day, right? It's something you look forward to, having a photo session. So just wanted to share that in terms of how, if we look at certain things in certain ways, it can add more aliveness to our day, to our experiences. Who's talking now? You know, who am I listening to now? Even though the physical body, the physical situation is something that I've become accustomed to, relating to in a certain way, who's talking now and listening for that? Well, we'll leave it there.